Sometimes a script you create will need data items from the command line, as opposed to just options. Recall that options are entries on the command line, other than the command, that start with a dash, like -H for help or human friendly, or the double dash version of those, double dash and a full word description of the option like help, or -D and maybe some data for a debug or something like that. Other times, the data on the command line should be simply the name of the item to be worked on by the command. It might be text data for a command that manipulates text, like a grep style command. More commonly, it will be one or more file names or directory names for the script to work on. You could implement these as option letters, which have data, which is the file name. For example, script name space -path, for example, and then the name of the file to work on. But most people who enter those things don't expect to put option letters in front of a file name to work on. Think, for example, of the copy command. You don't say copy -source file, file name, -destination file, file name. You just say copy file 1 to file 2. To do that in your scripts requires a slightly different kind of command processing than what we've done so far. We don't know what will be in it because it's going to be a file name and we don't know what's in the file name. This actually is not difficult to find on the command line. It just means that recording errors on the command line is handled differently. Let's go ahead and take a look at an existing script we've been working with, command args shell script. The command args shell script is one we've been using. It sets a debug variable to no and then processes the command line. As long as there is anything on the command line, we use the case statement to examine the $1 variable. We give some patterns to match, for example, -H or ~help, and commands to run for that situation, terminated with a double semicolon. Another pattern we might see on the command line is -D, and if we have that, we set the debug variable to yes and tell the user we saw it, and terminate that with a double semicolon. And in the typical case, we then have the star pattern, which says anything else. And for lots of scripts, that's an error condition. It means that the user didn't give a pattern we recognized. So we normally give some error message, sending the output to the standard error device, and exit with an error status. Again, ending with a double semicolon for the commands that match the case, ends with ESAC. After we've processed what's in $1, we shift so that what was there gets moved out of the way, and the next thing on the command line that was in 2 moves to 1. And we can go back with the done to the while and see if there's anything left on the command line to process. If there is, we process it again. Once we've done processing our command line, we can go ahead and act on whatever we found on the command line. So to add what we call unnamed arguments to the command line, what we're doing is we're basically saying they don't get an option letter like -H or ~help. They just have a name. So they're going to be picked up by the being an error. That's the actual data to work on. And what we need to do is save that data. Now, if we know how many of those things there's going to be, for example, if we only allow one file name, well, then we can check to see in here, instead of printing out an error, we can check to see, have we already got a file name? And for that, we can say if $file to work on, assuming that's where we've saved it, is not equal to the empty string. In other words, if we already have a file name, we were only supposed to get one, then that's an error. And we can tell them they've given us too many file names. again, sending the error message to the standard error device and exit with an error code. Otherwise, if we did not have a $file name to work on, or in other words, else, we can say file name to work on equals the thing we were given. So to recap, if we get something that's not an option, then it must be the file name we want. We check to see if we already have one by checking to see if what's in here. Because we might be comparing to a blank, we better put this inside double quotes. Because if the variable is empty, we're going to wind up with an error if we don't have it in quotes. So we're going to check to see if this variable is not empty. If it's not empty, we already have a file name. We should complain because we got another one. Else, in other words, if it had nothing in it, we want to save the current file name that we were given, I think it's in $1, into this variable. So if we have another one, we have an error. Assuming we only have one name on the line, we're going to have something in our file name to work on. And down here at the end of the script, of the command line processing section, we can do whatever testing we need to do. So if we require the file name, we can check to see if it's blank. And if it is, throw out an error. Standard error, and exit with that error. We would only put this section in if we require the file name in order for our command to actually work. Since we've required a file name, we better update our help line to say the command with an optional help, an optional debug, and a file name to work on is required for our command. So this is helpful if you have one unnamed argument. You should be able to figure out fairly easily how to expand this if we needed two file names. We might have two variables. We have to check if they're both empty and we get more names, that's too many. Otherwise, we fill in the first one with the first one we find, and the second one with the second one we find. There is another case to consider. The next case to consider is when we allow multiple file names or arguments on the line without option letters, and we don't know how many we're going to get. In that case, all we can do is save them all into an array to be worked on. So the way we would do that is instead of checking against one variable to see if it has anything, and if not, saving this thing as the variable, instead we would simply save everything that is not recognized as an option, everything that matches the star. So to do that, we would need an array to put these in. So we would want to begin by declaring an array with some name, that'll create an empty array for us. And then down here, instead of checking a variable, we would simply say if we got something on the command line, we want to save it to our array. So we would then say that the variable we are saving this in, which is an array variable, should have an element added and assigned. And the thing we should be adding is whatever's in $1 as an array element, so inside parentheses. So now, if there's something on the command line, and we look at $1 and it's not our help option, it's not our debug option, it's something else, we'll take it and add it to the end of our array. And then down here, after we're done processing our script, in addition to having our debug set, we can go ahead and do whatever we need to do on each of the things from the command line, which are now stored in the stuff on the command line variable, which is an array. We can make that a comment. We'll be using something like a for loop to go through those. We might say for the index into the array starts at 0. That's an assignment. The index is less than the length of the array, which should be done by counting up all elements of the array and each time we process something, the index should increase by 1, and we would use this kind of a for loop to go ahead and process that, preferably without any typos. And then put our for loop to go ahead and process by reaching into the stuff on the command line array using our current index to look at each item and go through and do it. So this will give you an idea of how to go about capturing an arbitrary number of things off the command line into an array you've created, so that after you've captured them all, you can go through the array and process whatever was on the command line as unnamed arguments. Named arguments have an option, unnamed arguments do not.